was afraid of what they would say about him for expressing his honest opinion about the labor situation. That indefinite, imaginary they has kept many a genius imprisoned in his own head because of fear to act and express himself frankly. Suppose people do criticize you. What of it? Any fool can criticize, and a lot of them do. But their criticism doesn't hurt anyone except themselves. It marks them for what they are. Men who analyze and think seldom criticize themselves with frankness. The man or woman who boldly does what seems to be right, even though it may not be in conformity with the views of the crowd, possesses strength of character that knows no such words as "I fear" and "impossible." I have just talked with one of these thinkers. He did not pledge me to omit his name. When I asked him what he thought about the present labor situation, he quickly replied, "If labor should win all it asks for, which it will not, we might as well move to Russia, where they make no pretense of permitting the people to enjoy freedom. The present issue between capital and labor is clear and easily defined. Capital is fighting for the right of men to work where they please, for whomsoever they please, and under whatever arrangement they please. Labor is fighting to exclude from employment all who do not pay tribute to the self-imposed leaders of labor. If labor should win, it would mean that the very fundamental principle upon which the Declaration of Independence was founded would be swept aside, and we would no longer have ground to boast of this being the freest country in the world." Anything nebulous about that statement? Whether we agree with it or not, we have the highest respect for the man who had the courage to thus frankly express himself. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and the man who is afraid to call each by its proper name is not entitled to the benefits of that which is right, nor immunity from the effects of that which is wrong. Whether we agree with him or not, we have every respect for the man who stands on his two legs, looks the world squarely in the face without flinching, and tells it what he believes. In front of the typewriter on which these lines are being written hangs a big sign that reads as follows: "I am becoming more successful every day in every way." A hard-boiled egg, who is a friend of ours, was admitted into the royal sanctorum for a few minutes, and as soon as his eye lit on this sign, he said, "You don't believe that stuff, do you?" And I replied, "Of course not. All that it ever did for me was help me get out of the coal mines and find a place in the world where I'm serving upwards of 100,000 people, in whose minds I am planting the same positive thought that this sign brings out. Therefore, why should I believe in it?" As he started to leave, he said, "Well, perhaps there is something to this sort of philosophy after all. I've always feared that I would be a failure all my life, and so far my fears have been thoroughly realized. You are condemning yourself to poverty, misery, and failure, or you are driving yourself on toward the heights of attainment solely by the thoughts you think. If you demand success of yourself and back your demands up with plenty of action, you are bound to find success. And there is a difference between demanding success and just merely wishing for it. You must find out what this difference is and take advantage of it. If you do not feel as bold as does this writer, you might try this experiment on yourself for a couple of weeks. Every leisure moment you have, say to yourself, "I am becoming more successful every day in every way." Write the same words out on a card and carry this where you can read it several times a day. When you say these words over to yourself, say them with positive assurance that they will be realized. Keep this up with persistence, but don't go about it with a halfway feeling that it is some foolish experiment that might get results but probably will not. Do you remember what the Bible says, somewhere in the book of Matthew, about those who have the faith as a grain of mustard seed? Go at this with at least as much faith, more if you can do so. Never mind about what they will say or what they will think about you, because they will know nothing about your experiment. If you will go at this plan with persistence born of faith, you will soon become so powerful and so able to solve your own problems that you will not care what they say. If you have only $100 left, invest it in a new suit and look prosperous. Like attracts like. O ye weak need of little faith, get wise to yourselves and claim your own. You have within that mind stuff that reposes in your head all the power you need to get everything you need. And about the simplest way of telling you how to use this power is to tell you to believe in yourself. This writer knows a man of 50 who is one of the most versatile men of his acquaintance. This man knows world history from the beginning to the present. He is of strong physique and makes an impressive appearance. He has a wonderful rhythmic voice that plays with perfect harmony upon the ears of all who hear it. He has an attractive personality. People like him and trust him. He has thousands of friends throughout America. Best of all, he has good health and at least 40 active years ahead of him yet. With all these advantages, the poor simp is getting nowhere because he does not know the power he possesses. There would be some excuse for him if he were not an able philosopher and did not understand how to reason from cause to effect, or from effect back to its cause. There is nothing within the gift of the American people that he could not have if he had the self-confidence to demand more of himself. Be it remembered that the real way to get the cooperation of others is to demand much from yourself. The man of whom we write resembles a horse that has been bridled, saddled, and harnessed by a man with less than 1/10 of its physical power. If the horse ever did any thinking and saw that it had all this physical power, no man would ever harness it again. Ditto with the man of whom we write. He has the power, and not physical alone, but the power of all powers, the mental. But he doesn't know that he has it. Consequently, he is doing the slow goose step down the dusty road to failure and decay. Know thyself, man. Know thyself. This has been the cry of the philosophers for ages. When you know yourself, you will know that there is nothing foolish about hanging a sign in front of your daily work that reads, "I am becoming more successful every day, in every way." Until you do know yourself, such a sign would indicate nothing except that a man using it was an eccentric person. If you were averse to experimenting on yourself, here is one that you can try out on some other person. Pick out some person who has but little ambition, one of the mediocre type, and begin to shower that person with suggestions that he seems to be doing better work, that he seems to be growing more ambitious, that he seems more self-reliant. Prophesy a great career for him. Keep this up as often as you come in contact with this person, and watch what happens. Very soon, your suggestions will begin to get into his subconscious mind. He will begin to spur himself up, and before he realizes it, your suggestion will have been performed by him into auto-suggestion or self-suggestion, and he will live the part and become the person that you pictured in his mind. It sometimes happens that an idle remark, dropped in a fertile mind that is ready to receive it at the right time, will change the entire career of a person. We have such a case in mind. A friend of ours was engaged in the typewriter business. One day he was bragging about the fact that he knew personally every purchaser and every stenographer who operated the typewriters sold through his office. He really felt proud of his ability to know all these people. An ordinary young man stenographer was listening, and he asked this question: "Aren't you limiting your possibilities by carrying all that useless detail in your head?" This question made our friend angry. Thanks for that. What right had an ordinary stenographer to ask him, a man of influence and success, such a question? Out of this anger came a revelation. He began to think the remark over, and the more he thought about it, the more he saw what the stenographer had in mind. Overnight, he changed his policy and began to turn all details of his business over to subordinates. Today, he is a wealthy man, retired from active business at the age of 42. with plenty of money in the bank and trustworthy managers who carry on his business and continue to turn money into the bank for him. The most important turning points in life usually come through some simple remark or happening that seems of little significance at the time. Generally speaking, anything that brings us up with a bang and makes us check up our philosophy and reinforce it where it is weak is good for us. The mind is quick to atrophy and become lazy and inactive if we take things easily and permit nothing to force the mind out of its ordinary, daily, routine way of functioning. There may be shortcuts to success, but many a weary traveler gets stuck in the mud trying to go that way. It often happens that a death in the family or some other shocking catastrophe serves to redirect the course of one's mind and force it into new and more efficient channels. Nearly every failure serves as a mental tonic that can be made to and will tune up the entire mental apparatus if one will permit it to do so. This writer has a few enemies, thank God for that. These enemies work for us day and night, although they don't know it. They work for us by keeping us on the alert, lest we give them some opening through which to annihilate us or destroy our plans. Do we hate our enemies? No. We used to hate them, but that was before we discovered how valuable they were. Mind you, we do not love our enemies, haven't progressed that far yet, but we make no effort to discourage them or kill off their efforts, because that would be as foolish as would be the farmer if he killed off all the weeds on his farm, thus taking away the substance that fertilizes the soil and keeps it alive year after year. The 11th commandment says, "Select thy booze with care, lest thy days on earth be cut short." Every successful man must have a flock of enemies. Show us a person who has no enemies, and we will show you at the same time a person who lacks the self-confidence and the courage and the personality to stick his head above those of the common herd who drift with time and events. Enemies are one of the most valuable assets of the person who looks upon them philosophically and understands the nature of the service they are unwittingly and unintentionally rendering him. Is this not a consoling thought to all who have been worrying because not everyone likes them? It is your thought. Appropriate it and make use of it. That's what we are passing it on for. Last night we picked up Emerson's essays and read his essay on spiritual laws. A strange thing happened. We saw in that essay, which we had read scores of times before, many things we had never seen during the previous readings. With pencil in hand, we read with heated enthusiasm, as though we had never read the essay before. It was so strange that we stopped and analyzed the experience. We found that we had seen, during previous readings, all that we were capable of interpreting at the time. We saw more in the self-same words this time because the unfoldment of our mind since the last reading had prepared us to interpret more. The human mind is constantly unfolding, like the petals of a flower, until it reaches its maximum development. What this maximum is, where it ends, where it leads to, varies with the individual and the use that he gives his mind. A mind that is forced or coaxed into analytical thought every day seems to keep on unfolding and developing greater powers of interpretation without limitation. This writer is satisfied that no mind is developed to anywhere near its maximum before the age of 50 or 60 years. If this theory is sound, how foolish it is for one to begin to select a nice quiet burial place and get ready to die when he begins to reach the most useful period of life, 50 to 60. Last night, the goddess of dreams stood beside our bed. She said, "Arise, mortal, and express a wish, just one, and it shall be granted instantly." We hesitated. The dream angel spoke again. She said, "Is it money, power, fame, health, friends?" To which we replied, "No, dream angel, it is none of these. Give us an understanding heart, and everything else will follow." Now, In the sober reflection of our wide-awake hours, we repeat that we ask for nothing except the intelligence to understand that which is going on around us. No human being needs anything except an understanding heart, for with that comes all else that anyone can use. Those who make it their business to meddle with economics will do well to remember that before there can be an equalized system of wealth distribution, there must be an equalized system of intelligence distribution. Intelligence, an understanding heart, is the power that controls every material thing on this earth, and one could no more change this law than he could stay the operation of the law of gravity and cause water to flow uphill unaided. Get knowledge. Get the ability to understand and interpret correctly all that goes on around you, and you will be able to get everything else you want. Intelligence rules this world. Get your share of it as quickly as you can. Mr. Edison has become the world's leading inventor, not because he had more brains than other men who have not accomplished as much as he, but because he has developed an understanding heart. Edison lives very close to nature. He hears the sound of nature's whisperings when and where men with better physical ears than his hear nothing at all. Mr. Edison has done nothing that any other normal man might not duplicate if he would develop the ability to interpret nature's natural law, as Edison has done. This ability is not a gift, it is an accomplishment, and the price that must be paid for it is persistent effort, intelligently directed. Oh, to be a man with an understanding heart. Down in Louisville, Kentucky lives Mr. Cook, a man who has practically no legs and has to be wheeled around on a cart. Mr. Cook is the director of a great industry, a millionaire, all made by his own efforts. He has been a cripple since birth. That is, he has been crippled in his legs since birth. In the city of New York, one may see a strong, able-bodied, and able-headed young man without legs rolling himself down Fifth Avenue every morning, with cap in hand, begging for a living. This young man could duplicate anything that Mr. Cook of Louisville has done, if he thought as Mr. Cook thinks. Henry Ford has more millions of dollars than he knows how to use. Not so many years ago, he was working as a laborer in a machine shop without education, with but little opportunity, without capital. Scores of other men, some of them with better organized brains than his, worked near him. Ford threw off the poverty consciousness, thought of success, and attained it. Every one of those other machinists could have done as well, had they thought as Ford did. Milo C. Jones of Wisconsin was stricken with paralysis. He could not even turn his body in bed without aid. He could not move. All of his limbs were practically useless, but there was nothing wrong with his brain. So it began to function in earnest, probably for the first time in its existence. Lying flat on his back in bed, Jones made that brain of his create a definite plan. That plan was prosaic and humble enough, but it was definite. And it was a plan. He decided to go into the sausage business. Calling his family around him, he told them of his plans and began directing them and carrying the plans into action. With nothing to aid him except a sound mind, Jones built an enormous sausage business and accumulated a big fortune in less than 10 years of time. All this was accomplished after paralysis had stricken him down and made it impossible for him to earn a living with his hands or his physical body. Where thought prevails, power may be found. The main difference between men is in the use to which they put their thinking apparatus. Intelligent thought carries men to the heights. Lack of it keeps them in misery, poverty, and want all their lives. Henry Ford makes millions of dollars because he first visioned millions of dollars and demanded of himself intelligent effort. The other machinists of Ford's early days visioned nothing but a weekly pay envelope, and that was all they ever got. They demanded nothing of themselves that helped them get more than a weekly wage. If you want to get more, be sure to demand more, but make no mistake about it, the demand must be made on yourself. Go out into the world where people are suffering, if you would learn about the emotions of the human heart. Find out what causes them to suffer. Find out how much useless suffering they do and why it is useless. Find out how much their suffering is due to their own neglect or ignorance, and how much it is due to causes beyond their control. Find out what goes on in the heart of a little child when some brutal person beats it unmercifully, and, if you can do so, find out what makes a grown-up beat a little child. Find out why some people try to close the gates of heaven to all who do not belong to their cult or creed, and measure their action by your idea of Christianity and see if it squares up with the teachings of the Master. Read the Sermon on the Mount, in which will be found the Golden Rule, and find out why so few people have thought it worth their while to apply this precept. Find out what happens to a man in his own heart when, by intent or unfortunate circumstances, he offends society and is locked up in prison where nearly all of his personal liberty, except that of eating and breathing, is taken away from him. Find out if this improves him or makes him worse. Find out also why the majority of such men come out of prison with a firmly fixed intention of evening up with someone for what they have suffered. Find out what it is that causes people to want that which is forbidden. Part 2. Success. The most popular word in the English language is success. A few have achieved it. Everybody wants to achieve it. Generally speaking, a man has succeeded when he has acquired all that he needs for his physical and spiritual well-being without having trespassed on the rights of his fellow men. However, no man ever succeeds in his own mind because no man ever gets all that he wants. There is always something further ahead, just out of reach, that man wants but does not acquire. Perhaps this part of human nature is founded upon one of the laws through which evolution does its work. The two great urges that push man into action and keep him moving are the sex urge and the urge for the possession of material things or personal power. Do not be alarmed if you are not satisfied. No man is ever fully satisfied, and if he were, he would stop growing because he would stop struggling. We contented ourselves in the early days of this magazine with the hope that someday we would have an audience of 100,000 readers, but soon we outgrew that limited hope and increased our vision so that we could see 1 million readers. The newly added lecture bureau will easily give us this bigger audience of 1 million. Then we shall aim for 2 or perhaps 3 million. The human mind is fearfully and wonderfully made. Once you fix your mind on the achievement of a given end and keep it fixed on that end with sufficient belief in your ability to attain it, unseen forces seem to ally themselves with you until you have succeeded. Whatever success you attain will be attained through the proper use of your mind. Your physical muscle power counts for nothing. Your mind power counts for everything. The mastery of the air, with the aid of the flying machine, was a remarkable achievement, but it was an achievement of the brain and not the muscle. The thing was accomplished in the inventor's brain before it was demonstrated with the physical aid of the flying machine. Harnessing the elements of the air and using them as a vehicle for conveying messages around the earth without the aid of wires was a wonderful achievement, but it was the work of the mind entirely. You wish to succeed. It could do you no harm to know that your success must come through the aid of your own mind, especially the imaginative section of your mind, wherein you build definite plans for the guidance of your physical activities. Once in a great while, success will seem to crown a man without effort on his part, through a stroke of favorable accidents. But most successful achievements come through organized effort, directed according to well-organized plans. The process of organizing your mind involves 15 factors, as cataloged in the Magic Ladder to Success lecture. When you hear this lecture, or when you read it in printed form, be sure to analyze yourself. Find out how many of these 15 factors you need to add to those you already are using, Organize your mind with the aid of these 15 factors, and your success will not be far away. How tactful are you? In the morning's mail, we find a letter from a young writer who finds grievous fault with us because he came to our office seeking employment and failed to convince our assistant that she should turn him through the gate to the editorial sanctorum. We have always admired persistence, but it is a dangerous thing unless directed with tact and diplomacy. Usually, it is fatal to success if a salesman begins his efforts to sell by provoking an argument with the man to whom he wishes to sell. The letter that greets us from our aggrieved contemporary covers 2 pages of snappy and to some extent clever sentences, but the painful, inescapable fact is that the letter convinces us of the soundness of our assistant's judgment in refusing the impromptu engagement. No writer who dips his pen in vitriol would make a suitable contributor to this magazine. Unconsciously, this young writer has told us more about himself in his letter of protest than he could have told us in person had he been admitted, a fact which we mention for the purpose of showing how dangerous is the habit of giving away to anger. Thought is the first faculty of man. To express it is one of his first desires. To spread it is his dearest privilege. Adaptability, the self-control to enable one to adapt oneself to any combination of circumstances, is a necessary quality for achievement above mediocrity. If you fail to get that which you go after, you will be fortunate if you charge that failure to your own lack of ability to plan or to your lack of powers of persuasion. You will be very unfortunate if, as our contemporary has done in the letter before us, you charge your failure to the man from whom you sought a favor or to whom you intended to make a sale. The editor of this magazine is much more interested in purchasing suitable material for its pages than the writer of such material is in securing employment. But he cannot recall having ever purchased anything through coercion or merely to please someone who had something to sell. Tact, said an old-fashioned Southern man, is what most of us ain't got none of. No man ever became a successful salesman without tact, and no man ever got very far in worldly achievement without good salesmanship. The friend who wrote us the letter expressing his annoyance at having called once without getting the opportunity to see the editor may be a clever writer, and his letter indicates that he is. In fact, a bit too clever. But he is not a clever salesman, and unless he learns to market his product, he will need tons of paper and many garrets to hold his manuscripts, for his manuscripts will not sell themselves. Ditto as to other classes of personal services. We go through many long, lean, and sometimes cruel years in gathering, classifying, and coordinating facts and knowledge. In short, learning something. Then we must go through another period of years of salesmanship, trying to convince the world that we know something. Woe be unto the man who goes at this convincing task without the aid of tact and diplomacy. Many a man has spoiled the chance of a lifetime by telling too much truth at one time, or at the wrong time, or by expressing his own opinion too arrogantly or too freely. If we said that which we know to be the truth about the world in general, and some of our acquaintances in particular, this would no longer be a Golden Rule magazine, and we would be making enemies faster than we could fight them off. While we know there is much that is wrong in the world, we have elected to turn the spotlight on much that we know to be good. And this policy seems to have been a sound one, for we are growing rapidly and serving well. If you take notice of every event that does not please you, your roadway in life will not be smooth. The more you show your resentment, the more will people delight in giving you something to resent. It's a good plan to develop tactfulness. What is a leader worth? The sales manager of a new organization was employed on a basis that enables him to earn $50,000 a year. One of the salesmen who works under the direction of this sales manager objected because he, the salesman, could earn but half that amount. There always has been and always will be a demand, a top-notch pay, for the man who can direct others, and such a man can practically set his own salary. No one can stop him. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to stop a real leader of men in any reasonable task that he sets upon himself. The great Havelock Ellis said, "The young men of today show a new attitude toward women and marriage, an attitude of simplicity and frankness, a desire for mutual confidence, a readiness to discuss difficulties, an appeal to understand and be understood." Carnegie made himself a multimillionaire by selecting men who had leadership ability and then setting no limits on their pay. Schwab made himself one of the most powerful figures in the steel industry by the aid of this same principle. Perhaps Mr. Schwab could have purchased the services of Eugene Grace, now president of Bethlehem Steel Company, for $50,000 or even $25,000 a year a few years back. But he preferred to give Mr. Grace all the responsibility he would assume and let him set his own income figures. He is a wise leader of men who understands that it is a poor policy to beat men down to the lowest figure possible when purchasing their services. A much better plan is to select men who have undeveloped capacity along a given line and then place upon their shoulders sufficient responsibility and give them sufficient pay to bring out the best there is in them. $50,000 a year is none too much for the services of an efficient man who can intelligently and satisfactorily direct the efforts of 100 men or so, helping each of them earn from 5 to 10 times as much as he ever earned before or could earn under his own leadership. How can I sell my services? The biggest market in the world is the market of personal services. Practically everyone has personal services for sale. We are in receipt of a letter from a young lawyer who wants to know how he can build up a clientele without violating the ethics of his profession by direct advertising. This is an excerpt from our reply, which may interest you. I started out to be a lawyer some 14 years ago, therefore I know something of the predicament in which you find yourself. Now, if I were in your place, I would become an attractive public speaker, and I would do my work so well that the newspapers would be compelled to give notice of it. I would find out what subjects were closest to the hearts of the people, and I would prepare myself to talk authoritatively on those subjects. An able speaker always commands respect and attention. The newspapers cannot ignore him, even if they choose to do so, and the door of welcome is always open to him. This is one of the most effective ways for a professional man to place himself before the people, and if he avails himself of it with tact and skill, he will soon find people making a beaten path to his door. By all means, learn to stand upon your feet and speak in public. If there is anything back of what you say, you will soon find a demand for your services, no matter what may be your calling, greater than you can supply. Like,